with all due respect.
All right. All right. With all due respect, guys, we're back. I don't even know what episode this is going to be. It might be 46, 47. I just know we keep doing them and you guys keep listening and watching. And so we're just going to keep doing it. So we're on live today with Ishak. And I pronounced that right. I had to ask you how to pronounce it. Just I'm sure you get it all the time. And I had a chance to go through your TikTok. Can you explain to our community if somebody said, Ishak, tell us about your coaching? I mean, they can go to your website, they can get on TikTok, they can watch your videos. But if somebody said, hey, describe your coaching, Ishak, what do you do in the world of health coaching or physique coaching?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you guys for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking shop with you. And yeah, so really quick, just to answer your question, I help people achieve their body composition goals with an evidence-based approach. And I would like to say a holistic based approach because you can't have, the physical side without the mental side of things. And I have been coaching for a little around like 8 years now.
Okay.
And I have been online coaching since 2016. It's been quite a journey. And I love what I do. I love helping people. It fills my cup up so much.
Yeah.
And so I work with a variety of populations, whether that be physique athletes or power lifters or just general population people. When you understand some of the base principles when it comes to physiology, psychology, it's really just about implementing different interventions for people, getting really good at that, and having repeatable outcomes over time. So.
I like that you before we went live, you used that word. I really like the word interventions. That that almost describes perfect what a lot of people in that industry do. You're intervening current habits and filling them with different habits. I really like that word, an intervention. Um, you mentioned something just what you said, when you know enough about the physiology, but you mentioned also the psychology. Okay. And I think that's something that I think gets lost in a little bit of what we do, right? I tell a lot of people that like there's so much information out there. You can figure out your macros, you can find a good workout program, you can do all that with Chat GPT and a good Google, right? Right? You could literally be like, I weigh this much, I'm this old. Here are your macros. Here's a good workout program, right? If that's all it took, we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic and everybody would be shredded.
Yes, this is true.
What do you mean when you say the psychology of it? What does that mean to you? Because I feel like a lot of people who try to go into physique changing and changing their body, I feel like a lot of people, and in my experience, they underestimate the psychology side of the change.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So, when it comes to the psychology side of things, I mean, you are literally getting someone to change their behaviors and habits. So, really, not only understanding where that individual is starting from, but understanding their experiences, like their diet history, is incredibly important for having them successfully change their habits long term. And it's not only getting them to change their habits, it's getting to do so in a manner that facilitates longevity and their enjoyment for their nutrition or their training. And you can sometimes get people to change physically without, really focusing on the psychological side of things. But I think it's especially necessary when it comes to dealing with individuals that have a history of binge eating disorders or even on the physique athlete side of things. Um, understanding how some of the habits that are necessary to get to that end goal are, in a way, sort of anorexic
Mhm,
behaviors.
mm,
And so if you are not a good coach, that can sometimes lead to messing people up permanently.
mhm,
And I don't really think there's a place for that in this industry. I personally consider that as malpractice.
mhm.
And if like a doctor did something that messed someone up, they would lose their license to practice, right? So I think as practitioners, people should be held to a similar standard. And to your point on Chat GPT, yes, sometimes people can just go to Chat GPT and they think it's that simple, when really getting someone to change their habits and behaviors and as a result achieve some sort of physical transformation, sometimes it's more complex than just like X's and O's of your nutrition and training. It has to do with a lot of your lifestyle habits and behaviors. And I had conversations with Chat GPT when it popped off. I don't know what, beginning of 2023,
Sure.
and it couldn't even hang in a conversation about some of the more complex details about nutrition training. I had to teach it some stuff, and then when I would ask it to pull up a paper or something to support its claim, sometimes it would link me to the wrong paper, and I'm like,
Mm.
okay,
They
there's something that it doesn't understand that people who, I don't know, have done their rounds in the industry over the years can have the foresight to, I don't know, implement with someone. Whereas ChatGPT is like, oh, just your macros, just your training, when it forgets to consider some of the nuanced details.
Yeah. No, the key word I think I heard you say in there is long-term change. Like kind of you didn't say it this way, but long-term change over time, right? Some you say they can kind of do it for a short period of time, but they can't do it throughout their whole life, right? And I do consider it part of our responsibility to teach people how to make long-term change sustainable over time so they don't go back to what they were, which even puts more, as I think about it when you say it, even more importance in the word intervention.
Mhm.
Because true intervention gives you the habits and the skills you need to not go back to who you were, right? And it brings up one of the things we kind of wanted to talk about. Um, what is sustainable dieting?
Oh man, that's a good one.
Okay. So, and I know, no, I feel like I'm throwing these ones at you. You're just like, hey, like we're all thinking now, right? What is sustainable dieting? How do you define that? Because, and I'll give you some context here. Um, I had a conversation with a coach online one time when we first started doing this about tracking food, tracking calories. Um, I have tracked food for 8.5 years, every day for 8.5 years. Um, it's been very good for me. I used to be a punishing eater. I used to like, and you probably hear this a lot from people that had competed. Um, if I ate poorly or lost my goals on a Monday, I would double cardio, carb deplete on Tuesday, Wednesday, right? Because I had an unhealthy relationship with eating poorly and eating bad. What tracking has done for me, it's helped give me context of, hey, I haven't I didn't ruin myself by eating 2 pieces of pizza. I can manage the rest of the day or tomorrow, eat normal and manage it so I can still enjoy the food, but don't let it held me down the streak of like overeating, but also I can still won't become an under eater. I won't become a punishing eater like I was punishing eater. So tracking to me had been a form of discipline to keep me accountable to not being having an unhealthy relationship with food. But I haven't dieted for 8.5 years, right? it's tracking for 8.5 years. I haven't dieted. I mean, if I dieted for 8.5 years, I'd probably be a hormonal mess, right? um, that's the context to this, is what is sustainable dieting to you? And is dieting even the right word?
Yeah, so very good points. And I would just like to say before we dive into that, think about how many products there are, programs there are out there to help people lose fat, even medications now, right? So the problem is people don't have trouble with losing fat, they have trouble with keeping it off, right? And that's because their approach is unsustainable, right? Eventually, when you get to that end goal, you don't want to revert back to your old ways. You don't want to gain all that weight back. You either want to maintain some semblance of your progress and continue to progress past that, right? So, with regards to sustainable dieting, a big part of dieting sustainably is making sure you're giving yourself an appropriate timeline to work within, right? Oftentimes people think the body composition progress they want to achieve is going to be like an Amazon package. It's not going to show up over. It definitely takes
Don't
some
we
time.
wish?
Yeah, giving yourself plenty of time is incredibly important. And oftentimes people have a mismatch with regards to their expectations, okay, and the timeline they're working within. So when there's that mismatch, they often tend to underestimate how long it's actually going to take, or they underestimate how much fat loss has to be achieved to look a certain way, right? So I think jumping into the deep end when it comes to dieting is definitely not what you want to do. Okay. So people have this fat loss goal or body composition goal. Hey, I want to lose, 30 pounds, 40 pounds. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but there are some prerequisites you have to put in place in order to make that happen successfully and sustainably. So, for example, okay, you want to lose 30 pounds. How about before you lose 30 pounds, or we try to, okay, we spend 16 weeks at maintenance calories. We improve your understanding of nutrition. We improve your understanding of how different macronutrients affect performance, your energy levels, the importance of micronutrients, right? The importance of nutrient timing. And then once they have those foundations set, okay, hey, maybe you have the green light to diet. Maybe if there's nothing wrong with your blood work, okay, maybe you've earned the ability to go through a dieting phase, right? So that's one note on dieting sustainably. And the advantage of providing yourself with a sufficient amount of time is you're able to leverage that time and you use it to your advantage, right? So context for competition prep. I mean, my preps, I know, there's some general population here, but for most of my clients, for myself, if we have to lose about like 30, 40 pounds to get them into stage conditioning or get them like relatively lean, it's going to take a little bit more than like 30 weeks, right? Not that we can't do it in 20 weeks. We totally can, but doing it with a longer period of time, it's not going to feel as grueling to get to that end goal. And you will have less of a desire to binge and restrict after punishing yourself through and this minimizes the need to make any sort of aggressive protocol adjustments. And yeah, I mean, like, how many times has someone gone through a fat loss phase and they're stating the countless hours of cardio they had to do, or the chicken breast and rice and boring meals they had to eat, right? So outside of this, dieting sustainably has a lot to do with someone's perspective when it comes to their approach around nutrition. And if you have to completely overhaul your perspective or your approach about nutrition, then that's likely an indication you're not ready for a fat loss phase, or you have a lack of understanding of some of the nuanced puzzle pieces. So, for example, a lot of people think they have to completely restrict themselves, cut out all their food, all the foods they enjoy eating, right? And what I like to tell my clients, and this is a rule I follow when I'm in competition prep, is the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of what you should be consuming should be coming from minimally processed, wholesome, micronutrient dense foods, whereas the other 20% could be allocated towards, like, hey, a serving or two of ice cream or a serving of chips, right? So there's nothing necessarily wrong with eating clean, right? But oftentimes it tends to be the smarter option when it comes to ensuring that you're accurate with your intake, ensuring that you're controlling satiety, ensuring you're getting sufficient protein in, ensuring you're achieving micronutrient minimums, right? So you don't necessarily have to restrict yourself. There's a degree of restriction that has to come with dieting, right? But you don't have to cut out foods you enjoy, right? So long as you aren't creating any huge deficiencies within your nutrition, you're training properly, you're recovering properly, then by all means, I mean, you could have a slice of pizza every day and still make fantastic progress. And there's levels to this, right? There's a level in terms of like, if you just want to get lean, you don't have to be overly restrictive. That's pretty easy to do versus like a competition prep. Okay, the first like 12 weeks, you could be kind of cruisy, loosey goosey with it, but eventually you have to lock in. You have to get a little bit more accurate with your intake. You have to be, almost like a military routine in a sense, but it should also be fluid in a way, right? So that's I think one of the reasons why I've been competing so long and why I love it, because I don't know, I just have maybe like the right mindset about how to approach it, which wasn't always there. It's something that built up over time,
It's a
built up.
learned thing you had, right? You had to learn that.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
When
I
you
love
we I was gonna say we do a big focus towards managing expectations, and I'm glad that you brought that up. When you have, let's say, a general population client, how do you help them manage expectations? We kind of already dove into, it's not an Amazon package, it's not going to happen overnight, but what are some other things you tell them as far as expectation wise that they need to prepare for, the next 3 months, 4 months, 6 months of their journey?
nothing crazy. I'm just honest with them.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, you may have to lose more weight than you think. It's going to take longer than you think. But if you're committed to making this change sustainably, right, then it's like it should be common sense. I don't want to say that's the buy-in for people because it's not really a buy-in, right?
Yeah.
Doing things properly. Like if they want to go to another coach that is going to take them through a 12-week extreme challenge, by all means do that. It's not going to hurt me, but eventually they'll be knock on the door. Can you please help me? Okay. All right. I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so.
when you tell them 30 weeks, some people I could imagine when you say that, when you're like, hey, the first 12 weeks is going to be, it sounds like the first 12 weeks is, I'm just going to educate you for 12
Mm.
months, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to educate you for the first 3 months. Then it's going to be another 28 weeks or 18 weeks of learning how to diet in a deficit and do the things you need to do to lose weight, because the first 12 weeks was preparing your body for it, right? We work with a guy who's a PA now, and he's kind of been the medical side of what we do, right? So when people come to us with medical issues or looking at blood work, we understand our scope. We have somebody that can do that. And he's looked at people, and people have been discouraged sometimes when they're like, he'll look at things from them medically and be like, you need to get your body out of a disease state before you can get your body into a weight loss state. Your body's
Yes.
not even ready to do that yet. And that can discourage some people, but it's being honest with people,
Mhm.
right? And I love that approach, because it is sustainable. We've all had people that have come to us and be like, my friend just lost 20 pounds in 2 months. And I didn't do that. What am I doing wrong? It's like, well, you're probably doing it right. You're not doing it wrong. I was at jujitsu one day, and a lady at open mat was came to talk to me. She knew what I did. And she's like, can I talk to you about some things I've been doing nutrition? I'm like, absolutely. She goes, I've been doing this for a year, but I've only lost 40 pounds.
Only.
That's really good.
Right? Yeah. And, I'm like, well, I said, well, from what perspective? She goes, I just feel like she was a bigger woman, so she probably had to change a lot of habits. And I said, first off, you're losing what, 0.6 pounds a week? I'm like, can we congratulate you for, like, I encouraged her that she's doing it awesome, 40 pounds. But what that told me in that conversation was she was apologetic for only losing 40 pounds in a year. Like I wasn't going to be like, I wasn't going to be proud of her, or I wasn't going to be like, I wasn't going to be like, oh, wow, like, ooh, right. I told her, you're doing great. If you can do that for another year and lose 80 pounds in 2 years, you're a whole new human being. Right.
Hmm.
But what it told me was, wow, people are really, they really don't understand the process.
Sustainable. Yeah. They don't understand sustainable.
Yeah, I love that approach when you said 30 weeks. Because if you saw my face when you said 30 weeks, I was like, oh, 30 weeks. Even I was like, oh, wow, okay, 30 weeks.
I mean, think about how many people throw themselves in the deep end of an extreme deficit and they don't have any understanding of the variables that influence rate of progress. That's just the nutrition side of things. We've just been talking nutrition, we've been
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about sustainable change. The training side of things is a whole different ballgame, right? And your training is going to be the primary means of inducing changes in your body composition. Your nutrition should be the primary means of supporting your training, right? So you can't really have one without the other. And just like how there are nuanced variables on the nutrition side of things, there's nuanced variables on the training side of things as far as volume amounts, as far as exercise selection, exercise sequencing, progressions throughout the course of a training block, utilizing things like a tempo scheme per exercise, right? So this is the advantage of where a coach comes into play, because you are literally giving yourself a head start because you're jumping the learning curve that most people have to go through. They take years to go through that learning curve, right? And to your point about the lady who came to you and said, "Oh, I lost 40 pounds." That's fantastic. I think oftentimes people try to pull it all off in one go, and that's not how it should be. Just like how you should periodize your training, and
Mhm.
just a way of like periodize is just a way of organizing your training over the course of the long term. Just like how you do that with your training, or you should be doing that with your training, you should also be doing that with your nutrition. Okay. So it's like, hey, we'll have 30 weeks of dieting. Okay. And then we'll have another 20 weeks at maintenance, right? And then we'll have another 30 weeks of dieting. And it's like, I think people do not understand that you can still make significant changes in body composition by just sitting at maintenance calories. So there's a fantastic paper coming out of Tampa University, and it is body recomposition. So all that simply means is losing body fat and building muscle simultaneously. And it occurs across a variety of different populations. More so occurs with untrained and obese individuals, right? So if like you're cruising at maintenance calories and you're learning all this stuff, you can still build some tissue and you could still lose fat. It may not be at a super fast rate as it would be if you were in a deficit, but it's still occurring, right? And through those improvements, you're improving your knowledge and understanding of things. And then once the diet happens, okay, that's when you could really take it maybe a little bit more serious. Okay, I'm going to give these next 30 weeks my all, see how much weight I could pull off. And then we'll have a little bit of a recovery period after, you know?
Oh, yeah. No,
I
I
would
like
say
that.
you're like top physique. Like from looking at you personally, you're somebody that holds top physique. How long have you been doing? Like, how long have you been training yourself for this? Just so people get an idea of what does this look like from not just a 6 month standpoint, like this is years of work.
Yeah, a decade.
Yeah.
Next year will be a decade. So, yeah.
It's that's the thing. It's like it's I feel like people often they're like, oh, I want to compare myself to somebody that's been doing this for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Josh, I know you've been doing this for, 2 decades or more. Like it's just that comparison is often like you say all the time, Josh, it's the thief of joy, right? And I think people need to remember that again, it takes time, but when you look at somebody, an athlete that has peak physique or a really great physique, this has been years of training and dedication.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is very sweet of you. I try.
Well, we all have had that client that will contact you on your site. Maybe they fill out your questionnaire or they ask for a consult call or however you do your coaching. And they say, I want to look like this person.
Mhm.
And they send you a picture, right? We've all had that. Like I've had people do that. And it's a girl on competition day who's 33. Somebody took pictures of her at the beach on competition day. First off, she probably feels absolutely miserable that day, like she's miserable, right? And they could most likely be on drugs, right? And they've been doing it 12 years, and this is a 20-week diet, and in 2 weeks, she won't even look like that person,
Mhm.
right? We've all had people do that to us, and you have to have a sit down long conversation. I always get a little bit like, okay, this is going to take a pretty deep dive conversation to explain to this person who that person is, and then you're not that person, and that we need to shrink this down into smaller sections, right, before we get there. I really love the conversation we've had so far about managing expectations, because I hope people listen to this and they're gonna maybe wherever they see it, maybe they see a picture of you, they see us talking, and they're going like, I want to get lean too. And I'm getting and summer's coming around and I haven't worked out in a year, but I want to look good at the beach in June. And you go, oh wow, that's probably not gonna happen, right? Right?
It started in January.
Yes, they start.
Yeah. Or
But
last June.
and
Yeah.
I love the education side of this. One question that we hear a lot, and we actually have a conversation about this all the time, is, and this was part of the dieting question, um, when you put somebody in a deficit, and I know there's a difference in deficits, like a 5% deficit and a 25% deficit are completely different, right? But when you start putting somebody in a deficit, say they go through that 12 weeks of education, they now understand how it works. They now understand their body. They're now educated. They're in a good mental state to go in a deficit. What does it look like to put them in a deficit? How much of a deficit do you start? And how long does that usually last?
Great questions. Great questions. So just to piggyback off your point on someone looking at someone online and wanting to look like them, I usually tell my people, you could look better than that, but it requires an investment, and that investment is time, right? So
Yeah.
you should measure your success based on the place you're coming from. And the like I love natural bodybuilding. That's why I've been doing it for so long. But the process of getting on stage is beautiful. You learn a lot about yourself. But actually getting on stage and getting tanned up and under the lights, meh, it's okay, right? Like I love the process of it more than the actual outcome. And the outcome is cool. And you look sick, right? But it's very short term. It's very short term. You look that good for maybe like 6 weeks, 8 weeks leading up to the show and on show day, and then after, okay, depending on what people do, all of that is like gone, you know. So, and getting lean is way different than getting out of your mind shredded. Okay. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with getting lean, and you could do that without doing anything extreme or aggressive. But remember, like physique sports, competition prep, it's an extreme sport, right? So you're literally getting down to single digit percentages of body fat that is not sustainable, okay, and has some negative adaptations associated with getting to that level of body fat. So, so to answer your question, when people come to me and they want to diet, how long should they be dieting for? What's the amount of the deficit they should be in? Well, I initially I like implementing a conservative deficit, maybe like 5%. See what that does to their body, analyze data, okay? Cruise there for maybe like 3 weeks or so, and then once okay, they have their habits in line, I feel like they're ready. Okay, we'll implement a deficit of maybe like 25%, right? And the thing when it comes to fat loss is you should try to make it as a least invasive process, right? And you should make the least amount of adjustments possible through that process. So my last season, it was 50 weeks. And throughout the course of that 50 weeks, I made 5 adjustments. Not that many adjustments, but the adjustments that I made, okay, I made sure that they were enough so that I could ride that wave for a while, right? So if you're making consistent adjustments week after week after week, maybe that's an indication you need to investigate your approach, you know? And yeah, so I guess this ties into the amount of the deficit they're in and dieting sustainably, but it's really utilizing tools like refeeds when it comes to dieting. So think about it, for example, like think about if you were to go get your car serviced, right? How is it running when the check engine light is on? You need new oil, you need air in your tires, maybe you need new brakes. It's not running all the best, right? And so when you go through the process of a dieting phase, eventually your energy stores, okay, eventually your ability to train hard, eventually like you get a little tired up here, eventually you start to take a hit. So in the sense of dieting, refeeds help recharge your batteries. They get your car serviced, right? They get new oil in the engine, new tires, new brakes. How does it run after? It runs significantly better, right? So refeeds are nothing more than a tool to help someone diet sustainably and successfully. And I think depending on the magnitude of the deficit and the diet duration, we will experience, I don't want to call them negative adaptations, but we will experience natural mechanistic responses from our body, okay, as a result of just becoming a smaller person. We've needed these responses back to our, ancestor hunter gatherer days when we felt these responses. Okay, hey, maybe we need to go out and get some food, right? So these adaptations or these responses are typically referred to as hormonal and metabolic adaptations. So in the hormonal sense, okay, for males, you'll experience a reduction in testosterone, okay? Thyroid stimulating hormone, T3, T4, which typically regulate energy expenditure. They tend to take a little bit of a hit, okay? You will also experience reduced leptin, which is your satiety hormone, and increased ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, right? So you have an imbalance in those two. Hey, I'm hungry. Hey, it's a little bit harder to fight cravings. And you'll also experience some increased cortisol, which is your stress hormone. In the metabolic sense, okay, you'll experience reductions in exercise activity thermogenesis, which is the amount of calories we burn related to exercise, which, to be honest, it's quite minimal, but it does reduce to a degree, right? You'll experience reductions in NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the amount of calories we burn non-related to exercise. This could be walking, fidgeting, our body tends to reduce those to conserve a little bit more energy. And we'll also experience reductions in thermic effective feeding, which is the amount of calories we burn related to the processing of the food that we consume. And that's just due to a lower food intake, right? And then obviously a reduced metabolic rate. There is a fantastic paper from Dr. Bill Campbell out of University of South Florida. And essentially, they're investigating how refeeds can be beneficial within the context of dieting. So not only do they help us in terms of reducing the magnitude of the adaptations that we experience, but they also help you diet for a little bit of a longer time, right? You're refueling glycogen stores, you're refueling your batteries, you're psychologically getting a little bit of a break because you're having a little bit more food. And refeeds are nothing more than you bringing your calories up to maintenance primarily through an increase in carbohydrates, okay?
Okay, so
And
you're only going up to maintenance on those.
yes, in some cases
Okay.
it can potentially be a conservative surplus, but it should generally be around maintenance calories.
Okay.
And you ever notice, like when you're dieting, you tend to maybe like look a little bit more watery. Your body's a little bit more stressed, right? And so a great example is like after you refeed, the water that we are holding within the intracellular space gets pushed into, or the extracellular space gets pushed into the intracellular space. And that's mainly because that's where we take up more minerals, more glucose. There's going to be a clearance of like metabolites. Our liver, our kidneys have more resources to clear out inflammation at faster rates. And so, refeeding is honestly, it's dependent on the individual when they're implemented, how much weight has been lost, how long they've been dieting for. They can range anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, or you could have a longer version of a refeed, which is referred to as a diet break, and that can range anywhere from 7 to 14 days. So refeeds and diet breaks are not an excuse to like go completely off the wagon, but they're like, hey, you know, they're calculated days to your maintenance. Your food selection should stay more or less the same. Rather,
Yes.
you're just increasing the quantity of carbohydrates you're having in a given meal.
That helps me. So she and I this whole week have been going back on refeeds, right? And she's like,
I love them.
yeah, the only time I've ever implemented a refeed was I was doing a lot of stuff from Lyle McDonald back, if you know Lyle, back in the day. And I was doing 12 days of dieting and then a 24-hour refeed. I would really restrict for 12 days and then refeed for 2. And it was just off like a video I watched of Lyle and all that. That's the only time I've done a refeed and my carbohydrate intake would go to like 500-600 on those days. It was very carb cycly. All right, that's my only experience with a refeed. So we were going back and forth, and I've heard other people say, "Oh, you know, you don't need to refeed until you get to a certain percentage of body fat." I saw that video you talked about, and I said, and Grace sent it to me, and we kind of went back and forth. Um, I'll basically what I've experienced and other people I've heard talk about it. But now that you say that you usually do a refeed just back to maintenance,
Mhm.
it helps me understand more of the context about how you're using refeeds, because I've seen people use the word refeed and maybe they're in a 25% deficit at 2200 and the refeed days are like 5000 calories.
Yeah, it's
I've
stupid.
I've heard of I know, I mean, I know your eyes, and you probably heard of people doing refeeds like that too, right? Like it's almost a day where they just blow it out, right? But
It's more like a binge day than a refeed day.
you're
It's like
doing
taking a whole cheat weekend.
calculated back to maintenance, where the caloric risk really isn't crazy high. You're just slightly messing with you back to maintenance to get the body back so you can keep going. You're not going in this crazy surplus. Because I'm sure you've heard people say, "Oh, I'm doing a refeed," and it's like double the calories and there's peanut butter ice cream on it, right? Right. So when me and her were going back this week, I think what I was hearing in refeed is not what you're saying in refeed.
That's the downside of social media, right? It kind
Yeah.
of turns into a game of telephone. Hey, I heard this person do this, and
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like this, and the entire approach gets kind of bastardized, right?
Yes. And now that I hear you say it, I can go and be like, okay, we were describing two different things.
Yeah, so in the literature, refeeds are referred to as intermittent energy restriction. Okay. They're also termed as carb cycles, right? And there's a couple different frequencies that you can, you know, do them. You could be in a deficit for, you know, 7 days. You could refeed for 2 days. You could be in a deficit for 4 days. You could have a refeed for 3 days. But yeah, the most important thing is that they're calculated days, and they should not be cheats or binges. So, for example, if I'm like a buck 50 and I'm dieting, right, and I refeed, my weight can do a couple of different things. It can either go down, and we experience that as the whoosh effect, our body just clearing out water,
I've
putting
heard
in
that
the
talked about. Yep. I've heard that mentioned before. Yeah.
space, or our weight can increase, right? Because there's more food volume for every gram of carb we consume. Skeletal muscle stores 3 to 4 grams of water. So it could go either way, right? But if your weight shoots up by a significant amount, let's say like 5 to 6 pounds, and it takes you about like 1 to 2 weeks to get back down to, let's say, for example, a buck 50, that's maybe an indication that you're refeeding a little bit too much. Your calories on your refeeds are a little bit too high. It should maybe take like 2 to 3 days to get back to your normal baseline average. And then that's how you continue to push the envelope a little bit further in the context of fat loss, right? So
How
Okay.
often would you program a refeed? Say somebody was dieting for, 6 months and they were in a stricter deficit. How often would you program a refeed and for how long?
Yeah, usually on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, right? And they're not only beneficial for athletes, they're incredibly beneficial for general population people, especially people who have more than, let's say, like 40 pounds to lose, right? I know one of my general population people, uh, Jake, we lost a little over like 60 pounds. And we consistently refed on a weekly basis. Not saying that everyone can refeed on a weekly basis. You have to
Right.
analyze data, look at your averages, analyze your training performance, right? But yeah, I think oftentimes people think it's only for competitors or only athletes, but going back to like those negative adaptations that I was just covering, those adaptations happen whether you're a competitor or not, right? So it's in your best interest to, if you want to diet sustainably and not binge after the diet's done and gain back 20 pounds overnight, not really overnight, but over the course of a couple weeks, then it's like, hey, it's in your best interest to diet smarter, not harder.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I really like them, and I grew to like them over the last 3 years of coaching, 3 or 4 years, because I feel like maintenance calories are a very forgiving time. Not saying that you're going to go off the rails with maintenance calories. They're not for, drinking a bunch of beer and eating cheeseburgers, but when you go to maintenance calories, you're forgiving yourself a little bit more for having more food. So with my females, they really work because they learn, okay, I can eat this food and I feel really, really good in my workout the next day. I feel really, really good going to bed that night because I feel fed. I don't feel underfed.
I mean, it's especially important for women. Like, how often do you hear from women, "Hey, I'm eating like chicken scratch, 1,200
Yeah,
calories, doing all this cardio, I'm doing all this exercise," right? Women's physiology is a little bit more sensitive to men's physiology. You can't push it
right.
as hard, right? So it's like oftentimes once you start feeding them enough and you implement the right protocols, they will naturally make these improvements in your body composition without you having to push them too far. So before we started, I was previously speaking to you guys about how I had this female client who, was in this binge restriction cycle, doing a lot of cardio, 12,000 calories. I'm sure if you've been in the industry for a while and you're a practitioner, you've heard of this case. It's very common. So what we did is we brought her calories up to maintenance. Okay. We improved her understanding of nutrition and we are now dieting, and we're dieting on like 1,800 calories, right? With all these improvements to her lifestyle, her habits, her behaviors. So it doesn't have to be that hard. And women, especially, you guys need to be eating. You need to be eating because that's what's going to help you be training a little bit harder, right? You train a little bit harder, that's what's going to induce those changes in your body composition. Not eating nothing and training incredibly hard and you're expecting to see these results, right? And you'll often, like, let's say, for example, someone's dieting really hard on super low calories, training hard, but someone's dieting a little bit smarter on a little bit more calories and they're taking their time with things. Oftentimes the difference in the end result will be dramatic in terms of the appearance, right?
You're muted, Josh.
Okay. There's so many we work with. My brain's going like anytime we have these
Mhm.
someone has those kind of examples, I always think of the people we've worked with in the past.
Yeah.
And a predominantly number of men I've worked with are eating a lot more than they think,
Mhm.
right? They're taking in a lot more calories than they think. I always, with my clients, when they want to start tracking their macros and tracking their calories, I always try to get them to learn to track without any changes. Like just learn to track.
Mhm.
And then we look at that. And they, okay, now that you learned to track, we're going to make some small changes. Most women are eating way too little.
Especially women between like 35 and 60, 1000%.
Eating way too little. They're not
Mhm.
feeling their body. They're not getting into a position. Um, they're eating way little protein. Food quality is horrible, right? So you try to start doing those changes. Um, I used to coach a girl who was a CrossFit competitor, regional CrossFit competitor, and we worked with her nutrition. former college basketball player, so very athletic and muscular. 5'7", 155, 160. And we were pushing her up to 3,000 calories a day with abs.
Yeah, I love to hear it.
With abs. Like she had abs and was rocked up.
Mhm.
And I always use her an example with people. First off, she's been working out forever. She was a college athlete. She did CrossFit. She knew how to Olympic lift. She knew how to train. I remember one time she went through the small off squat program, and so she's squatting like 3 times a week and on 3,000 calories a day and lean. And I use her an example with women because I say, one, this is the power of the female with muscle. She is a calorically expensive human being
Mhm.
because of all the muscle. And she didn't look over muscle, like she wasn't a drugged athlete. She's just a strong physical girl that's been lifting her whole life. Her output was incredible. She had muscle. She knew how to eat. And I think when we were looking at her diet before we started looking at it, like her high days were like 2,200 calories. And when we got her to 3,000 calories, her body physique changed incredibly.
Because your output changes,
Her
you
output
know?
changed, but like she used to be watery. You say that watery look on 2,200, like you can tell she was hormonally stressed because she wasn't eating enough and training hard. When we got her calories, the body changed. I tell people this. I almost think the color of her skin changed.
Mhm.
Almost like her skin looked better,
Mhm.
more vibrant. So I think that's a very interesting thing to say. Women's bodies are so much more sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think women tend to also undereat on protein and
Mhm.
not try as hard because they think they're going to look like the Hulk when that's not the case. And it takes a lot of education to get them past that barrier. But I mean,
Yeah.
resistance training is incredibly important even for women, and training hard at that, especially because women go through osteoporosis as they age, just
Yeah.
naturally, right? So resistance training and sufficient protein is incredibly important because it increases bone mineral density, right? So our metabolism oftentimes is a furnace. The more you feed it, the bigger that fire gets. The less you feed it, depending on the duration and the magnitude of how less you're feeding it, it's a little small fire. It's
Yeah.
not burning as much as it could, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's a very great point. I want to have the conversation that the industry has always had in physique, at least when I was following it, is the argument, I guess the debate around the whole concept of lean bulking. Right. You hear people say that yes, you can lean bulk, you can get big and put on muscle and still be lean. You don't have to, you can put on muscle when you're in a deficit. No, you need to be in a you need to be 500 calories. You hear all the cliche things. You got to be plus 500 to build muscle. Um, Talk to us a little bit about the concept, where you think maybe it came from, and what's your overall thought when people say, well, I want to stay lean but get big. I want to build muscle but stay lean. Where do you stand in that conversation? Is that a
Fantastic.
loaded question? Is that a loaded question?
No, no. So I think the misunderstanding comes from a lack of understanding, right? From I don't know, people thinking that back in the day, bodybuilders ate like this to get bigger. So I got to eat like this and I got to get fat. And that's what I got to do. Right. There's a fantastic paper by Dr. Eric Helms. It is titled, if you don't know Dr. Eric Helms, I love Dr. Eric Helms. Such a great guy, great educator.
You mentioned Bill Campbell last time. A friend of mine always sends me I think he messes with me, the questions Bill Campbell put out, like his little exam questions. He'll send them to me. He's like, answer this one, A, B, or C. I'm like, oh crap, man, you're putting me on the shelf by like Bill. So yeah, Eric Helms, yeah, those guys, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Bill Campbell's is a super sweet guy. I had the pleasure of going to USF and meeting him and talking shop. And Eric is someone that I've known for a while too. And I look up to him and his ability to just like a great communicator, great coach, great person, great human. But anyways, yes, there's a paper by Dr. Eric Helms. It is titled, "Is an Energy Surplus Required to Maximize Hypertrophy?" And the conclusions of the paper were that you can build muscle being in a deficit if you optimize your approach, and optimizing your approach is not limited to just nutrition stuff. It's also entails training stuff. It also entails lifestyle stuff. So you could build muscle in a deficit. You could definitely do it at maintenance. You can potentially do it at a little bit of a faster rate being in a surplus, right? But it doesn't have to be a 500 or 600 calorie surplus. It could be a very conservative, okay, 100 calories above maintenance. Okay, let's analyze for a month. Let me sit here. Let's see rate of progress. Okay, maybe 200 calories the next month. So we should aim to gain 0.5 to 1% of body weight on a biweekly basis. For most people, that's about like 1 to 2 pounds biweekly. Okay, if your goal is to build a little bit of muscle. And conversely, when in a fat loss phase, it is 1 to 2% of body weight per week if you're trying to lose some fat. So it's like around 1 to upwards to like 2.5 pounds, depending on how much you weigh. The advantage of using percentages is it scales to your body weight. So yeah, and I also think there's a little bit more nuance to the macronutrients you are administering that surplus through. So there's another fantastic paper by Dr. Jose Antonio, and I forgot the specificities of the paper. It's been a while since I've talked about it, but they administered a 500 calorie surplus just through protein. Okay, and then they had another group that was in a surplus that was not coming from protein. And the group that was in a surplus of just protein, okay, extra 500 calories coming just from protein, okay, they didn't gain as much body fat as the other group, but they gained both the similar amount of muscle, right?
Huh.
And so that leads you to believe, okay, like, was there errors in this paper? How did it get published? I had a chat with Alan Aragon about the paper, and he was alluding to the fact that, okay, hey, thermic effect of feeding a protein is double that of carbs and fat. So the body could have just expended those calories through, processing of that. You could have excreted it through urine. There's a variety of different ways in which, your body could potentially use those calories to its benefit. And that also leads to these updated protein guidelines that recently came out. I believe it was this year, where I believe the author is Raphael O. Probably butchered it, but I made a video on it recently, and they're basically concluding that, okay, hey, if you're dieting and you want to maximize muscle retention, you may need anywhere from 1.5 upwards to 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, right? Whereas we've previously thought, okay, anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 grams of body weight, protein per body weight is, generally the sweet spot. So there's more information that comes out over the years that allow us to update what we think and the guidelines we implement with clients. And that's where, like, hey, this paper from Dr. Eric Helms is an energy surplus required to maximize muscle building. It doesn't have to be a crazy surplus, or these updated protein guidelines, So we don't know everything, and we should definitely use science as a guiding compass. I think people can also make the mistake of using that science as like religion. I've done this in the past before too. It's something you recognize and you improve on, especially as an educator or practitioner. There's a lot of things that science does not investigate. There's a lot of things that we still don't know. And I think that's the beauty of this industry and having an evidence-based approach.
No, yeah, I think back to a lot of things, especially in my history of working with athletes, where I come across programs that I wrote 5 years ago, and I look at them now and I go,
Ooh.
"Oh,
What was
like,
I thinking?
did I kill this kid with this program? Like, who's this kid now? Like, has he got like bilateral knee surgery 5 years later? No, but I think we have to be intellectually honest and say that we've talked about this before. I always struggle with ideology. I always struggle with absolutes. I don't like to paint myself into a corner. I always like to give myself room to understand that I'm going to grow and change over time as a person and as a coach. So
So we'll research,
I don't like to put myself in a corner, because I understand that I need to be enable for me to be best for my clients, I need to be fluid in my understanding and pivot sometimes from a previous thought based on the information I have. And if I can pivot, then I think it helps me obviously become a better coach. I don't become ideological in my view. I don't have the feeling that there's only one way and it has to happen this way and it has to happen this way every time. And then I can be better for people around me, right? Hey man, we usually try to keep these like an hour, be respectful of your time. I tell people we're respectful of their time for an hour, but let's be honest, most people don't listen to a podcast last an hour. Yes, I don't know, but I really appreciate. I really learned. Obviously, in our conversation about refeeds, we got clarity on what he meant by it, right?
You don't have to argue anymore.
Well, yeah, and it was. I don't think I just understood what the example of the
No,
refeed.
I know.
Social media, right?
I think they get misconstrued with like cheat weekends and weekends off and just like overall diet breaks. But when I totally agree, when they're used strategically, they're really helpful.
Yeah.
So
I think the first thing I think about from the concept is a mental side.
yeah,
Right.
definitely.
A little bit of a break
Yeah.
for 25%.
Mhm,
Right?
definitely.
Outside of the hormonal and metabolic adaptations, we have glycogen stores, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Eventually, those glycogen stores get depleted based on consistent dieting, how much of a deficit you're in. So when we have refeeds, we're refueling those glycogen stores to give the audience listening an idea of how that looks. Think about a raisin versus a grape,
Yeah.
So when you have more juice in the tank, you're able to train harder, you're able to train better, you hold on to your training performance for longer. That's going to be the primary means for muscle retention, so.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed carb cycling a long time ago when I carb cycled.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. And one of the reasons I tell people I enjoyed it was that my grocery cart looked normal.
Yeah, for sure.
I actually had a normal looking grocery cart because of how I carb cycle and had higher fat days and had higher carb days and lower fat days and played with my calorie intake and played with all of that. I had a normal grocery cart where sometimes when you see people dieting their grocery cart, you can look down and be like, whoa, they're dieting, bro.
Yeah.
I had a normal looking grocery cart. So, Ishak, when we post this, I'm going to push people to your content, to your social, how they can get in touch with you. I can tell, and this is me being honest, I can tell by your demeanor that I feel you put people in a really comfortable place to talk about their struggles and their nutrition. And you almost have a way, I bet, with your clients of making them feel calm about the process.
Definitely.
Right? And that only comes from doing this for a decade, brother.
Who's cutting the onions?
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, in your demeanor and the way you deliver it is very pragmatic.
Very, yeah.
We have people that come to us, and so do you, that are very panicky about their health. I got to lose weight. I got to do this. Like, I want to be lean, or I got to do, and they bring a sense of panic to making change. And we have to have the ability to make people, one, to feel comfortable to be honest with us, right? There's a level of honesty people need to have with us, right? Because I can't help you if you're not honest, right? So I love it. I really appreciate you coming on. What's that?
It makes our job significantly harder.
You know what most of them don't know? They don't know that we know they're not being honest.
Yes.
Right? I know that you're not being honest. I'm just waiting for you to tell me so we can create a better relationship. So, hey, we really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully it wouldn't take up too much of your time, and we'll push people, and we hope people get something from this. I think they will.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for having me on. And for some of the audience listening, back these people, hit them up, and give us a screen cap or two on your stories.
Awesome. I appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Talk to you guys. Thank you so much.
With all due respect.